Why won't you ask again the cinnamon square? Special reason why when there mesmerize the simple-minded politicians made you buy it. I'm just sitting in my car and waiting for my girl. I'm just sitting in my car and waiting for my... What's up, everybody? I'm feeling much better. Still a little sick, but I got some sleep in, got some vitamins in, I'm feeling better. Sean's feeling sick. I hope he feels... I guess it's just that time of year. Deep fried audio, I sleep. Deep fried video, finally. Please drink responsibly, friends. If you drink without a limit in mind, you'll mess your body and your brain up. I know. Duh. But it's pretty stark between my normal episodes and the last two I uploaded, which, yeah, I was drinking a little bit on the last last episode that I uploaded. Or, 2 episodes ago, actually. But I was just mainly having a bit of a bender, which is bad, you know. It's bad to do that. It's bad to do that during Lent. Not a good thing, but it is what it is, you know. What other side do they do? You know, I get the vibe that my numbers would be much better if I just slowly drank myself to death on stream. But I'm not an over-socialized university intellectual, or on the other end of the spectrum, a top-tier boglum. But in this one, I am utterly owned because I'm just not a fan of drinking. So I'll be a 100 IQ normie loser on this particular issue. I don't care about number going up, you know? And for that matter, every YouTuber that hits 10 mil either becomes a sex offender or a mediocre musician. I don't want that. No, I don't want that. So, yeah. Also, ADHD isn't real. Most people diagnosed with ADHD come to that conclusion. More so than any other mental illness out there. And I can assume that a lot of people complain about it because they have either OCD, which I feel is a real thing, where you become obsessive and compulsive, and sometimes that overlaps into paranoid obsessive compulsive behavior. And when that paranoid obsessive compulsive behavior intersects with delusions, it can oftentimes lead to the worst form of schizophrenia that oftentimes gets stereotyped as all of schizophrenia. But schizophrenia is a very, very it's a very unique type of mental illness that essentially sections people's brains into multiple different sections. Like, I have been listening to a friend explain how his brain works for a long time, and I've pretty much gotten the assumption that some days he just comes out of the chamber going 12 different directions. Some days he goes out 24 different directions, but regardless, he has to, like, list things out and actively work towards like, not obsessively, but like directly list things out and actively work towards certain brain states, and curtail certain vitamins and practice certain things in order to, you know, ritualistically, in order to gear his brain in a certain way. And I think that is fascinating. And I think that also says something deep about how everybody really works. He's just more keenly aware because the grooves in between the sections of his brain are more distinct and profound. So, yeah, if people who have ADHD, if they don't have any other illness, they probably are normal, probably just fine. And the other thing, other than OCD, is depression. Depression is when there's just blackness in the brain, when there should be, neurons firing, and that can be caused in a variety of different ways. I have it in my family, but I also notice that when I eat turmeric, not only is my physical health better, my mental health is better, and that leads to me making better practices, which increases my active spiritual health, because there's also a passive spiritual health that's actually embodied when you dwell in darkness for long enough, but you don't become actually uh, you don't blame yourself, you don't blame God, and you sit in darkness for a long enough period of time. Excuse me, that you see, um, you examine things in a more distinct way. Other people, not necessarily like it's clearer, but in a more distinct way, and oftentimes that's what genuine esotericism is about. A lot of people are confusing both fantasy and exoterism with esoterism, but the esoteric nature of the individual is to look within, and that's something embodied in a lot of different religions. You have these weird edgelord atheistic types, a lot of them being Jewish. They think that like wizardry and alchemy is and drugs, which is part and parcel of alchemy, is a feature of esotericism, but that's not true. You're looking into a flask. You're not looking into yourself. At best, you're looking into a reflection of your outward nature, which is exoteric. And so, yeah, there's very little introspection there. That's unfortunately where a lot of these weaponized concepts and these deliberately hooked, barbed behaviors that tears away at people's ability to practice wellness in a beneficial to them and others way. That is exactly why certain societies are disliked by a vast majority of healthy societies, and where a lot of societies through infiltration become unhealthy through like masonry and through things like, well, whatever the Ottomans were doing, because their vizier crap was obviously very warped and twisted, and it led to a massive collapse. And like the long-term consequences are so dire. It's very likely the Ottoman Empire's fault that Gaza is being obliterated right now, because if it wasn't for them, the English wouldn't have partitioned the Middle East as they have done. It just it just wouldn't it wouldn't be on the agenda. Would not be on the agenda if the native societies had been strengthened in a way that wasn't extractive to Constantinople, and the diplomacy of inter-Islamic and Christian uh, connection was stronger, based on the fact that the Ottoman Turk wasn't constantly messing around in the Balkans. So, anyways, let's move on. I've been very bad this land. I ate way too many carbs, and I drank to excess a few times. Not good. I break pretty hard with a lot of the other tradcasts on a lot of good things, but unfortunately, this last Lent was one of the worst that I've ever had. I've had better Lents when I was agnostic. I've had better Lents when I was Protestant and didn't know what Lent was. I've had better Lents when I was Orthodox for sure. My best Lents. And I had a better Lent last year, but this Lent just wasn't that good. It just wasn't that good for my own decisions, and I am going to continue to fast through it. And anyways, I break on a lot of traditional Catholics, tradcasts, on the concept of the rapture. I think it'll be a steady and slow unveiling, shrinking back of global evil, and it might come in a way people do not expect. It might come in a way more metaphorical than literal, like the fire from the heaven being a descent of the Holy Spirit. Um, and the grasslands having already been burnt up, and not just some sort of a finger snap event where all of a sudden, boom, all the grass is a third of the grass is on fire on Earth. I think it will have already been burnt up, and the consequences and the recognition of the interconnectivity of all things and the importance of preservation of God's creation instead of people thinking that they can play God, that will be, I believe, the divine revelation that comes down as the Holy Spirit is often depicted in art as fire from the heaven. I think that's I think that's pretty close. A lot of the Marian orders are very, very close to the money, but some of them are like caught up in hyperliteralism, which has never been something that the Catholic faith has been known for, is hyperliteralism. It's been very open to the variety of different ways that writing and speaking can change the meaning of reality in a vast spectrum of ways after it's gone through those steps of being translated from one viewpoint to another, or through time, or through different languages. And after Lent's over, I'm going to continue to fast. I'm taking inspiration from Null, who is fasting really, really good for this Lent. I didn't even know he was practicing Catholicism. I thought he had dropped away from a lot of that around the time that and it's really inspiring to see him doing good. It's good to see. Unfortunately, he's suffering, but that suffering will bring him closer to an understanding that the good times are there to punctuate reality, not to become the standard and ergo not really good. So to suffer is to live in a way. And as men, we should be more accustomed to suffering. Or children. That's what makes us men instead of boys. Being more accustomed to undertaking the tasks that will bring you suffering but eventually pay dividends. And not in a strictly financial way, in a broad, general way. Yeah, and I couldn't even begin to describe the hell of realizing I had a girl who was perfect in every way and that I was a lazy ass about it. Same as always, our reaction to wasting our blessings. Same as always, the result of not punctuating pleasure with deliberate acts of work, striving, and dedication to things that are difficult, despite the fact that some days you don't want to wake up in the morning. Sam Hyde didn't actually buy a Dodge Ram, did he? There's no way he'd be that stupid. Massive debt is one thing, but buying a poorly made truck that's just a glorified paperwork serves no other purpose than fantasizing running into people or buildings. But then with that, there's the inevitable. And then what? In America, you're liable to get shot, and if you damage any property or any people, you get chased down by the police. That's their job. Job isn't to, nanny everybody and burp them. It's to protect life, limb, and property. And property is the one that's been siphoned most of its attention to reason. Nah, there's no way that he bought a truck that's the size of a of a Ford 450 that has like a quarter of the power. There's no way he bought an overglorified paperweight. There's no way. There's no way. And Stellantis has already bid it. They're shrinking back real hard. And I was watching an old Nick Rochefort video, and he called it like 4 or 5 months before I did, because he's got his thumb on the pulse for sure. It's not just me saying it. Stellantis is pretty dang cooked. And you know what? I don't see a lot of the new Jeeps with drivers that are acting good. Like the people in Rams are the most annoying people on the road, in general, other than the Rice Rockets, of course. But are those really people? The fact of the matter is, I've never seen property I want to buy with a Ram in the driveway. I go driving around. I go walking around. I enjoy looking at architecture and gardens and stuff like that. And you never see a nice house with a Ram in the driveway. because the people who drive those things, they tend, most of the time, to lack subtlety and finesse in design and in mentality. It's reflective of their business, of their purchases, their decisions. It's kind of strange how people online have become obsessed with calling other people online they deem inauthentic LARPers, live action role players, like they're eating a leg of mutton at a Renaissance fair or something. Proper term if you're dealing with somebody else online who you think is just pretending for a fantasy reason is role player. But to call them a LARPer is, in a non-ironic tone, is to expose yourself as somebody who just like throws around mimetic words without actually understanding what they mean, which is usually a big tell that somebody's much younger than sometimes they're role playing as. In such cases online. Wild to me that the biggest grift in the last 10 years is Silicon Valley kids going to some old guy who is in power, like the Pope, and like impressing him by clearing the viruses off his laptop or something like that, getting a $1 trillion contract. You know, protein used to be necessary in war to mend strained muscles, but you can get Italians and Indians, stick bugs, to operate machinery and drones at a fraction of the protein intake that you once needed. You can get vegan Indians, you can get amphetamine-fueled Italians, and you hardly need to feed them at all. Just mentats, I guess. Well, let's not get into that. I'm probably muddying up some pretty interesting Dune lore based on the translation into Fallout lore. Talbot is an extremely storied name. It pops up all through history. How's the one on Kiwi Farm so pathetic? Nicholas Talbot? What the heck? And I hear he is from a prestigious family, one of the offshoots of the Talbot name. Just like Christian Weston Chandler is a distant offshoot of the prestigious Weston family. It's fascinating how these things happen. And inside of these people, you know, just as any individual, there's still the will to assert themselves on a global stage. You know, we're literally all nerds these days. Be a dork requires genuine effort to accomplish. You gotta work hard to be a dork in today's nerd culture society. So, here's the thing. Ukrainian people, plug your ears. Russia might be the most moral army in the world. Because of that, they have extremely high morale. And I know the two words aren't the exact same, although they do have some interplay. They're also an enemy you wouldn't mind fighting in the grand scheme of things if you're forced to fight a particular army, because they treat their POWs fairly, like the U.S. did in World War II, before we handed them over to the Mossad, of course, to be tortured. If you're fighting countries like Israel or Ukraine, you have to worry about rape from the Gooner freaks shot throughout their countries. It's like fighting Slaneshi demons, and they also have a much higher level of torture. The Goonerwanger Brigade over there. But for real, what Mossad did to POWs in Germany 100 years ago was sadistic torture, like testicle smashing and stuff like that, to get false confessions out of a lot of these people. After they had surrendered, how they pushed for the execution of 1 million men, pretty disgusting. And that disgusting behavior that they got away with echoed into the future. That's the exact reason why neo-Nazis say that the wrong people won the war, but it isn't the Americans who were the wrong people. Nor was it the innocent Jewish people, Catholic people, disabled people who were tortured and starved in these concentration camps, the ones that do resemble the concentration camps that the Israelis have set up for other people. It's, well, I lack words for it. It's evil. And evil is an all-encompassing, generalized word. It is what it is. And to get into that a little bit, the most disgusting part of a lot of this is seemingly how the Masonic Prussians who invented the public school system to create 1,000,000 soldiers likely deemed it reasonable to execute those 1,000,000 soldiers after their project had gone tits up, if you will. But knowing your enemy is a genuinely evil force is a great morale boost. I would assume that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is probably just two tremendously evil forces recognizing that they would rather fight innocent, good people, peasants, from the Chukchi Peninsula over to France and anywhere in between. They'd rather fight good people than each other because it's easier that way. That's what I assume that is. IDF soldiers and US soldiers both have an extremely high rate of suicide. They struggle after committing these war crimes and killing kids. They struggle with it for the rest of their lives. A lot of times they kill themselves, and they're cited in their suicide letters that having to do these sorts of things stayed with them. The ghosts are louder than the guns. And it is what it is. I don't wish people to be on the path of evil. And these weirdos under it all are still somebody's child, still made by God, and should turn to the light, and shouldn't dwell in darkness, and do have sensitive souls, regardless of what their propaganda tricks them into thinking. This is what a lot of the music industry does with young black people in America. Their propaganda tricks them into thinking that, you know, like murder is cool, that murdering people is an acceptable thing to do, and that disrespect is like the biggest problem in the world, when that just makes incredibly weak, trigger happy freaks that destroy their own communities and themselves. And I wouldn't want to be in Israel right now. I hope all the good people manage to get out. You know, devoid of logic, reason, and tradition, and thinking only with the heart and not the mind, leads Catholics to become Joe Biden. He probably thought he was imitating Christ, riding in on a donkey. But what he really ended up being was a bag boy for the Pharisees. Many such cases, my friend. Many such cases. Alright, y'all. Hope everyone has a good one. Stay well. Cheers.